House of the Dragon takes place 170 years before the main series events of Game of Thrones and A Song of Ice and Fire. Given that fact, I really didn't expect it to have any strong influence on what we know about either series, just based on that massive time gap. I was proven wrong by the very first episode, which changes the entire way that the Targaryen dynasty is viewed. Specifically, at the end of the series premiere of House of the Dragon, we get the reveal that Aegon the Conqueror, the individual who founded this dynasty that has ruled Westeros for 270 years at the start of A Song of Ice and Fire, before being overthrown by Robert Baratheon, did so based on a prophecy, this vision of a doom coming from the north that he needs to repel, or his line needs to repel. Today, we're going to take a look at that prophecy, at its history, and what it might mean for the future of the series as a whole. While it doesn't seem to factor into what exactly happened in Game of Thrones, there are many ways it could come into play in A Song of Ice and Fire, as this was a note from the author himself. Before getting into theorizing, we should go over the details of the prophecy itself as stated by Viserys I Targaryen. He says that Aegon the Conqueror was inspired to conquer Westeros based on a dream. He saw the doom of man, beginning with a terrible winter that came from the north, and with it darkness of some kind. Specifically, he said that the Seven Kingdoms needed to be united in order to face this threat, and this threat could only be faced if there was a Targaryen seated on the Iron Throne. We know, as of Game of Thrones, there isn't a Targaryen on the Iron Throne at that point in the story. I think Cersei is still queen at that point, unfortunately. So it doesn't seem to apply to the show, but there are a lot of interesting implications as to how it could play out in the book. Additionally, Viserys specifies that this has been passed down from king to heir since the time of Aegon, though we do have the sense that it did lose out at some point in the Targaryen history, as there is no record of this prophecy anywhere in any of the records in The World of Ice and Fire, Fire and Blood, or any similar historical texts in universe. I have seen some eyebrows raised as to how exactly this prophecy was passed, and I do think there is a way that it could have happened that does make sense for the story as a whole. Passing from king to heir sounds pretty simple at this point, especially given the fact that there have only been a few kings prior to Viserys. But even with those few kings, there were some very messy succession situations. Specifically, for those who might not know, Aegon the Conqueror had two sons, Aenys and Maegor. He passes the throne first to Aenys, and upon Aenys' death, it then passes supposedly to Aenys' son. However, Maegor kind of supersedes this and takes the throne for himself before being overthrown by Aenys' second son, Jaehaerys, as his first son, Aegon the Uncrowned, is killed and not able to become king. Given that succession crisis there, and the fact that both Maegor and Jaehaerys were not thought to be directly in line for the throne, or at least the immediate heir, it makes sense that people would be a little confused as to how this prophecy may have passed down. I believe that the passing of this prophecy can be explained by Aegon the Conqueror's style of ruling. He is very different than any other Targaryen monarch that comes after him because he serves as sort of a co-ruler with his sister. Bearing this in mind, it makes sense that he would have passed this prophecy on to both of his sons, hoping and thinking that they might be able to rule in tandem together. That would explain why Maegor might have known about this prophecy, and it does add another layer of motivation to Maegor wanting to take the throne. Perhaps he thought his weak brother Aenys would not have been strong enough to fight off this threat from the north, had it emerged during their reign, and that could have been a portion as to why Maegor ends up taking the throne from his brother and from his brother's line. Additionally, I could see Aenys replicating his father, and not just telling his eldest son about this prophecy. Maegor has no heirs, and because of this, it might make sense for Aenys to tell both his eldest son Aegon and his younger son Jaehaerys about this prophecy, thus ensuring that it passes regardless of who is going to claim the throne. I could see Aenys wanting to just fully follow in his father's footsteps in that regard, and it would very much make sense to just make sure both people knew the prophecy going forward. With that being said, we do seem to be at the point in Westerosi history where this prophecy gets lost. I'm not going to get into spoilers for House of the Dragon, but in such a messy succession conflict, it does make sense that if certain people die, this knowledge is going to be pretty much entirely lost to time. We are not going to know anything about it in the main series, which lines up with everything we know from A Song of Ice and Fire and Game of Thrones. However, there is some indication that this prophecy may have been written down and rediscovered later in Targaryen history. Specifically, Prince Rhaegar, son of the last Targaryen king, Aerys II, is said to have researched prophecies for much of his upbringing, and at some point seems to have stumbled on something that changed him. He didn't have any interest in fighting or being a warrior prior to this. However, after he discovered something in some library, he emerged and asked the Master-at-Arms on Dragonstone to teach him the ways of the blade. Overall, it seems as though Rhaegar found something that gave him this sense of prophetic weight, and the fact that this is something that is going to need to happen in order to preserve the dynasty. My thought is that Rhaegar likely rediscovered the Song of Ice and Fire, perhaps recorded by one of the previous kings from this early area of Targaryen history, and written down in order to ensure that the Targaryens' true purpose for rule is preserved. And before we get into theorizing on stuff for the main series, be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you enjoy the video. I do all kinds of stuff on A Song of Ice and Fire and House of the Dragon, and I'd love to see your support in the future. Thank you. I think we actually might have a hint as to who passed this prophecy down to Rhaegar in the text. However, I will note this is getting way far out into tinfoil town, so if you don't believe this, I don't blame you, but this is something that came up, I think, on a live stream with Fantasy Haven. You can see me do it live, but it does make sense to me, and I just like it a lot, even though it's like the tiniest possible detail. So, I have to explain another theory to explain my tinfoil theory. So, in the North, in A Dance with Dragons, the Freys are in a pretty bad state. Nobody likes them, and because of this, Wyman Manderly bakes 3 Freys into pies on his way to Winterfell. There's more to the theory than that, but I'm going to do a broad strokes version for the sake of not making this video way too long. One of the Freys baked into these pies was named Rhaegar Frey. These pies are later served at a feast at Winterfell and eaten by all of the residents there, including several Freys. One of those Freys is Aenys Frey. The Freys have a habit of naming their children after whoever is in power at the time. You have a lot of Aeryses, a lot of Targaryen names, you have a lot of Roberts once that happens, you have some Lannister names once Tywin's in power. So we see a wide variety of names throughout the Freys. The fact that this is both Rhaegar and Aenys seems somewhat strange to me. In addition to the fact that Aenys is eating Rhaegar, my thought is that it could be George kind of giving a slight tip of the hat to the fact that maybe Aenys wrote this prophecy down somewhere, and in doing so, consumed Rhaegar's life with this all-powerful knowledge that it is his destiny to do this to preserve the dynasty and the realms of men as a whole. Or it could have just been that there are a lot of Freys and they just happen to have those names. But I digress. Specifically, the thing that kind of pushes it in that direction for me is the fact that the Frey's name is Aenys, because that is a very uncommon name. We have like no Targaryens outside of the first king Aenys who are named that name. Partially because it doesn't sound great, I assume, and partially because he wasn't a great king. The Freys, like I said, like to suck up to those in power, and there's been no one in power named Aenys since about 300 years ago. It's also worth noting that Aenys is described as very bookish and concerned with legacy as well, so if anybody from this era would write the prophecy down, it would very likely be him. It is interesting to look at the text of the prophecy itself, as there is one key detail there that might indicate future events in the Winds of Winter, specifically saying that the Targaryens must be on the Iron Throne in order to fight back the White Walkers. George likes to have prophecies kind of not make exact sense or not exactly be one-to-one, and I think there's a very direct way that this could not be one-to-one and still end up working out and making for a great story in terms of having a Targaryen on the throne. That being Aegon VI Targaryen. Many people believe that Aegon VI Targaryen, aka Young Griff, is actually a Blackfyre in disguise, and because of this is not a true Targaryen. This could add another wrinkle to the prophecy, the fact that everyone thinks that there's a Targaryen on the throne. Even Aegon might think that he's a Targaryen, however he isn't truly one. It could be kind of an added twist to this prophecy to make it not quite exactly what you would expect, and it could add to Daenerys feeling the sense of dread and seeing that there isn't a true Targaryen on the throne at the time this threat occurs. The presence of this prophecy does make me think that the events will take place in the television show and in the books in roughly the same order. So I think that Aegon will come in and take over things in the south, and then Daenerys might go north to deal with the White Walkers, and then come south to deal with Aegon. As I think after the confrontation between Aegon and Daenerys, it seems pretty likely that neither of them would be on the throne. I was very hesitant at first as to this prophecy existing and being a part of the lore, but the more I think about it, the more I really like it. I think it makes a lot better character motivations on the part of a number of different characters. Aegon the Conqueror, Maegor, Aenys, Rhaegar, all of these individuals are now fueled by this perception of destiny they have from this dream that may have been prophetic, may have not been prophetic. I think it's fascinating, and it could tie into a number of elements to come in the series, and I'm very excited to see how that plays out in the Winds of Winter. What do you think of Aegon's prophecy? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe while you're down there. It really helps support the channel, and it just makes me feel good. It helps me grow. Additionally, I will have many more videos on A Song of Ice and Fire coming out in the near future. I was on a bit of a hiatus recently because of my law school finals, but now I am on winter break and I will be starting a new semester in January, so I should have a bit more time to make more content, do more live streams, and I am very excited for that as we're going to start gearing up for House of the Dragon Season 2, which I am so excited for. So yeah, if you enjoyed, be sure to do all that stuff, like, subscribe, all that, and I'll see you all in the very near future. Peace.